जस हिंदी देखने वाले सारे व्यूअर्स को मेरी तरफ से नमस्कार। आप देख रहे हैं स्ट्रेट टॉक एंड मैं आपकी होस्ट आश्मिता। आज मैं आपको एक बहुत ही इम्पॉर्टेंट एंड अकम्पलिश्ड इंडिविजुअल से मिलाना चाहती हूँ जो आज के प्रोग्राम में हमें गेस्ट की तौर पे ज्वाइन करेंगे, जहाँ पे ये कोविड की क्राइसिस पूरी दुनिया को रोक के रखी है एंड सबको शट डाउन में रखा है, सबको क्वारंटीन में रखा है। वहाँ पे जो हमारे फ्रंट लाइन वर्कर्स हैं, ख़ास करके ट्रैवल इंडस्ट्री में, चाहे वो फीमा के साथ काम कर रहे हैं, लॉ इन्फोर्समेंट में काम कर रहे हैं या एविएशन में काम कर रहे हैं, दीज इंडिविजुअल्स आर ट्रैवलिंग द वर्ल्ड टू हेल्प इन द फाइट अगेंस्ट कोविड। जहाँ पे हेल्थ केयर वर्कर्स की रिकग्निशन एंड अप्रिशिएशन होनी चाहिए, वहाँ पे फ्रंट लाइन जो ट्रांसपोर्टेशन में एंड पूरी दुनिया का जो आज की डेट में मूवमेंट ऑफ गुड्स है उसको फैसिलिटेट करें, उनकी भी रिकग्निशन होनी चाहिए। बट द गेस्ट दैट्स गोइंग टू बी जॉइनिंग अस टुनाइट, they are the unique and inspiring blend of both. Yes, I'm going to be introducing to you someone who is both a cardiothoracic surgeon coming out of New York and also a Boeing 747 jumbo jet pilot, practicing in both medicine and aviation simultaneously. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vijay. Dr. Vijay, welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you. Dr. Vijay, first of all, we want to start the program by thanking you for your work and your service at this time. We are aware that though you are a practicing cardiothoracic surgeon out of Mount Sinai in New York City, you're also a practicing jumbo jet pilot, and right now you're assisting FEMA in transporting millions of pounds of medical equipment from across the world to bring it to our frontline healthcare workers here in the United States. Dr. Vijay, tell us a little bit about, first of all, what it is that you're doing right now and how you are doing this extremely arduous, extremely demanding schedule to help in the fight against COVID.
I normally used to fly from the 1st of every month to the 18th, and then from the 19th to the 31st, I used to work at Mount Sinai Hospital in Brooklyn and in Manhattan. But now, on account of the COVID crisis, FEMA has asked selected pilots of jumbo jets to fly essential supplies from places such as China and Japan and Malaysia into different sectors here in the United States, including Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and Atlanta. So now I fly exclusively from early April until the end of May for FEMA. So we do these flights, which are about 10 hours to and 10 hours from China.
Oh my goodness.
And we have a 2-hour layover. So that constitutes about 22 hours out of 24. And we do have places to rest in the airplane. It's a heavy crew or a double crew, so it's 4 pilots to the plane. When we land in China, we are quarantined. The airplane itself is quarantined to a certain part of the airport, and we are not allowed to deplane. In fact, we are not even allowed to get out of the cockpit. The cockpit door is sealed, and we take our food and water and all supplies from the US for both legs when we go. And all customs and immigration is done online. So nobody visits the cockpit and we don't exit the cockpit at all. And that's a very strict precaution in order to stay safe during these times.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about the actual, the service that you're doing here. We're very happy to hear the extremely stringent measures you have to take. But tell us about some of the equipment you're transporting and which parts of the world you have to fly to bring some of this very much needed PPE over to the United States.
About 70 to 80% of our flights are to China, and we do go specifically to the Wuhan area, which was the epicenter, because most of the medical manufacturing shops are all set up in and around Wuhan. Since Wuhan airport is closed, we go to airports that are within about 100 miles north and south of Wuhan. We go to places such as Changchao and to Changsha, and majority of the material that we bring are face masks and personal protection equipment and sanitizers and so on. We also go to Japan. We do bring some ventilator parts needed for the respirators in the hospital in the ICU. We also go to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Malaysia is the world's largest producer of medical gloves, and that's where we bring in plane loads of medical gloves. So each of these trips, we're able to bring about 250,000 pounds of essential supplies. And so far, we have done close to about 30 or 40 of them. And I've been personally involved in about 15 of them. So that's close to 2 million pounds of essential supplies. And as you can see in the picture, the entire airplane, which is like a building, is filled to the roof and to the tail with essential supplies. And in this video, it's actually masks that we are bringing from Kuala Lumpur. We also bring masks from China, especially from the Changchao area. And I suppose we will continue with our FEMA trips until the end of May, and it may be extendable to sometime in June with anticipated release and lockdown. We do expect some hotspots and we do expect some spurts. And hence, we may need to stock up or rather overstock on these personal protection equipment items.
Dr. Vijay, there's so many questions I have for you as someone who, obviously because of the nature of this virus and the shutdowns it's imposed on civil society across the world, people are experiencing it everywhere, but they are experiencing it just in the vicinity of their locality, their city, their local community, their town, what have you. But you have this unique experience of having seen COVID play out in different zip codes, so to speak, right, all across the world. So I want to talk to you about that too, but we're going to stop for a quick break right here. Don't go anywhere. Dr. Vijay joining us from Anchorage, Alaska to share his amazing story as both a cardiothoracic surgeon and a jumbo jet pilot in the time of COVID. Don't go anywhere. इस break के बाद बातें ऐसे जारी रहेंगी. We'll see you on the other side. वेलकम बैक फ्रॉम द ब्रेक. आप देख रहे हैं स्ट्रेट टॉक एंड आज हम आपके साथ एक बहुत ही खास, बहुत ही यूनिक गेस्ट को लेके आए हैं, डॉक्टर विजय, who is joining us from Anchorage, Alaska. Dr. Vijay is a cardiothoracic surgeon out of New York and also a jumbo jet 747 pilot. At this time, he's helping FEMA transport millions of pounds of much needed PPE equipment from all across the world here in the United States. Once again, welcome back to the program, Dr. Vijay. Dr. Vijay, before we left for the break, we shared with the viewers what it is you're currently doing in your capacity as a 747 pilot. You are actively helping FEMA transport millions of pounds of PPE from places like China and Indonesia and Malaysia, to name a few. And this is something that puts an incredible burden on you. I mean, this is hard to imagine for any human being to be in a work shift that is 22 hours, so to speak, right? जैसे आपने हमें बताया पहले, 10 hours to fly to China. You load and you turn right around, 10 hours to come back to Anchorage where your drop-off is, where you're stationed out of currently. And that's essentially one work shift for you, and you're not allowed to, due to the security reasons, even leave the cockpit. I really want to know about what you've experienced in some of these different areas where you were allowed to go or stay for the night to rest. But before we get to that, I am sure हमारे सारे viewers, they are probably so curious to know, how did you end up here? How does one, end up both a accomplished cardiothoracic, you're a heart surgeon at Mount Sinai in New York City, and a 747 jumbo jet pilot, which once again are two things that, you know, it's an accomplishment when someone does one, right? You've managed to do both. So how did you end up here? Tell us a little bit about your background first.
Well, I immigrated from India in 1989 to the United States, and I have always had, even as a child, a passion for aviation. And it's just that at that time in India, in the late 70s and early 80s, it was so difficult to pursue aviation. And combined with that, I wasn't too good at mathematics. So I had a notion that in order to be a pilot, one needed to be an aeronautical engineer. And since I wasn't so good at mathematics, that didn't seem like a great option. But it definitely did seem like an option that I could visit later on in my life. And so I decided to pursue medicine. A lot of my relatives from my mother's side are physicians, and I've had plenty of inspiration from that end. And so I decided to pursue medicine. Aviation fascinated me on account of airflow and aerodynamics and so on. And cardiothoracic surgery is also very similar in that it's blood flow minus the mathematics. And so I did choose to go that route. I did my general surgery at Mount Sinai School of Medicine in New York, during which time I did take a year off to go down to the Medical University of South Africa in Pretoria. And it was roughly around the same time that Nelson Mandela came on as South Africa's leader. And it was the same year that Aishwarya Rai and Sushmita Sen were crowned to their titles in South Africa. So I stayed there for about a year, did my cardiothoracic surgery training, and had the fortune to meet Dr. Barnard. Christian Barnard is the one who did the first heart transplant in the world. I came back, finished my general surgery, and did my cardiothoracic surgery at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine in New York, and I've been on faculty there since, and stayed there until 2010. At which time I moved to Beth Israel Medical Center in Brooklyn, which was subsequently bought by Mount Sinai. So it's a full circle for me. I started over at Mount Sinai and I'm back at Mount Sinai now.
Right.
And
right. Go ahead.
And it's been an absolute pleasure in terms of a journey, both along the medical and along aviation side of things. I started my general surgery residency in 1992 and started my aviation in 1994. However, my general surgery training took precedence and I had to interrupt my aviation training. And 9/11 came along and it was difficult to continue aviation. So I did take a sabbatical for about 4 years before going back in about 2005, back to aviation. And I've been flying passenger service for United Express, Elite Airways, before I decided to go into cargo and international on the jumbo jet.
So, you know, it's so interesting. In the conversation we had prior to this interview, you kind of made a very interesting comparison, which I think fits perfectly here in this conversation. You were telling me that, you know, you were always drawn to aviation, to some of the mechanics, right, of how planes work, and that's what pulled you in. When you chose to go into medicine, the heart had some similar attributes that pulled you in for the same reasons. It's such an interesting comparison. Please share that with us.
Absolutely. I think at first glance, a lot of people think they are two entirely different professions, aviation and medicine. But cardiothoracic surgery and piloting a jumbo jet have so many things in common that it's actually weird and surprising. Just to give you an example, when we do medical school, we go through certain subjects such as anatomy and physiology and pathology and so on. And that constitutes a bulk of our training on how the human body works and how the human systems work. And in aviation, we have something very similar. We go through the same structures. We go through the electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic systems and so on. And just like we have a skeleton in the body, we have a skeleton of stringers in the airplane that make up the airplane's structure. So from an anatomical, physiological perspective, an airplane goes through what's called a systems engineering approach, which is exactly the same that we go through in the anatomy and physiology classes in medicine. And in operations, both medicine and aviation require what's called a team approach. So in the surgical operating theater, we have the surgeon, the assistant, the anesthesiologist, and we have the nurses, and so on, and they form an integral team. And each team member has very clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Coming to the cockpit, we have exactly the same approach. We have a captain, we have co-pilot, and we have other pilots and engineers and mechanics and load masters and so on, who have very defined roles, but then come together as a team to produce a positive outcome. And then I think what's interesting in a day-to-day basis in the medical field in the operating rooms is that we've borrowed from medicine the checklist philosophy. Checklist philosophy allows us to not forget any steps in a given procedure. And that is so common in aviation, and that's one of the main reasons why aviation today is as safe as it is. And this checklist philosophy has been brought into the operating room in medicine. And we are trying to duplicate now the same level of safety as seen in aviation. Wow. And a checklist philosophy definitely helps in that. And to go one step further, we have what's called preventive maintenance in aviation, where at the end of a certain number of flights or certain number of duty hours, we sample oil and fuel and other materials in the airplane to make sure that the airplanes are up to standard. And a similar mechanism exists in medicine as well. So we have blood tests, and we have endoscopy, and we have other tests that we do which keep the human body up and running and in good shape. So there are very many similarities. And as you mentioned, the heart of the human is the heart, and it's a pump. It takes blood in through one end and pushes it out through the other. And the heart of any airplane is the engine, and it takes air in one end and pushes it out the other. So, and all the moving parts in the human body, heart, and all the moving parts in the jet engine are very similar in terms of operation and in terms of the care needed and maintenance needed. So I'm perfectly comfortable on both sides.
I think once again, it's certainly not every day that you meet someone who can not just draw such clear parallels between two industries such as medicine and aviation, or more specifically piloting a jumbo jet and being a cardiothoracic surgeon, but you're certainly making it look easy, Dr. Vijay. So I'm sure viewers greatly appreciate that. Once again, I really want to get an idea of some of the things you've seen, some of the unique perspectives you can share with us in terms of the flights you've been taking as part of your work with FEMA recently to transport, essential PPE medical supplies from across the world and bring it over here to the United States. But we're going to stop for a quick break here. Don't go anywhere. Viewers, आप भी जुड़े रहो. हम इस छोटी सी ब्रेक के बाद कन्वर्सेशन बिल्कुल ऐसे ही जारी रखेंगे. ब्रेक के बाद सारों का स्वागत है. आप देख रहे हैं स्ट्रेट टॉक, एंड आज हम बात करें डॉक्टर विजय के साथ, जो न्यूयॉर्क सिटी में रहने वाले एक हार्ट सर्जन है, बट ही इज़ ऑल्सो ए 747 जंबो जेट पायलट. एंड आज जो उनका काम कोविड एफर्ट्स की रिलीफ में हो रहा है, उस पर थोड़ी सी डिस्कशन हो रही है. सो वंस अगैन वेलकम बैक टू द प्रोग्राम, Dr. Vijay. Dr. Vijay, you quite articulately and beautifully shared with us the similarities, surprisingly, that exist between medicine and aviation, and particularly the kind of work that you do. You're a cardiothoracic surgeon, but currently you're exercising your piloting skills because you are working with FEMA to transport all of these essential PPE equipment. Once again, When we think about the shortage that is being experienced regarding some of these essential supplies, especially in places like New York City, your hometown, at the start of this pandemic, oftentimes people, don't realize or don't have the capacity to realize why such a shortage can exist, right? So you are a part of that essential link in the supply chain, so to speak, that is able to work to lessen that shortage. But can you share with us a little bit about, how is it that such a shortage can even exist, right? In the work that you do, whether it's as a surgeon in a network such as Mount Sinai, or as a pilot of a jumbo jet, or going to places like China, Japan, Indonesia to bring some of this equipment over. What do you say to the average person that just doesn't understand how we could even have a shortage of supplies such as this?
Well, it was a strategic decision on part of the United States and other developed nations to export their ability to manufacture items such as personal protection equipment and so on to countries like China and Malaysia and other Far East Asian countries. And all pandemics have a signature spike in cases. It wasn't clear with the coronavirus pandemic as to what sort of signature spike we could expect in terms of incubation periods and so on. And we had approximated all our modeling initially based on the common seasonal flu. However, when the eastern seaboard was sealed, Boston, Philadelphia, Maryland, Washington, D.C., and even to some degree Miami, were all closed. And the only port of entry into the United States was New York. And a lot of the American citizens who had been to Italy and to France and Germany and Spain and so on had to come through New York. And when they did come through New York, we did not have adequate testing available at that time. Testing was still in its infancy. So the only screening procedures that were available at that time was check for symptoms and check for temperature and so on. And even though a large proportion of these incoming, returning American citizens from Europe were quarantined and checked, we could not contain it as well as we would have liked. And part of that resulted in scores of people being positive and symptomatic in a very short period of time. So this spike was unexpected. And it also placed strain on our reserves, on our stocks of personal protection equipment. And by the time we realized what exactly we needed to do in terms of prevention, such as sanitizers, gloves, masks, and personal protection equipment, they were all taken in the stores. It might have helped if we had rationed our sale. Unfortunately, that wasn't done. So personal protection equipment were all bought out, and certain people who were a little bit slow on buying those were deprived of them. And at the same time, all our partners overseas had very short time to mount a response to this spike. So they could not increase their production because they had already increased the production to an enormous degree. And they were also overwhelmed because China was the epicenter. And China is also one of the largest producers in the world of such personal protection equipment.
Right.
And so China itself was suffering the COVID pandemic, and so they needed to use their own production. And so there was very little available in excess to send to other parts of the country, such as world, such as to the US.
Right. So yep, go ahead, please.
So I think that caused somewhat of a panic in the United States. And it also caused a large amount of non-compliance with some of the precautions that were put out.
Right. Dr. Vijay, you know, the PPE question, the PPE issue is unfortunately just one part of this health crisis that's unfolding. You know, the other part is the response, right? Where the PPE is something that you can look at it as a preventative aspect. You know, there are certain things that, whether it's on a state level or a national level, that are being undertaken, that are these reactive responses. And you, because of the unique role that you're serving right now to help with this crisis, is giving you a perspective on how other parts of the world are responding to this crisis as it unfolds in their cities and towns and states. So what can you share with folks, you know, whether it's, you know, our viewers in North America or back home in India that are watching us right now, from your experiences on how other parts of the world have responded to COVID?
Well, I've had the privilege to visit China, Malaysia, and Tokyo. I've had a few occasions when we did lay over in Tokyo on account of rest reasons. And I was very impressed with how Japan was handling the COVID crisis. And some of their interventions were truly remarkable in the sense I never saw a lockdown or a curfew notice while I was in Tokyo. I have never seen any sign asking one to sanitize hands or to put on a mask or to maintain social distance. Despite all that, I have noticed that the Japanese have adhered very strictly, totally based on personal responsibility of maintaining safe social distance, wearing a mask, hand sanitizing, and so on and so forth. So it is my belief that lockdown is just one element in the precautionary measures. And lockdown is useless and ineffective if other precautionary measures are not followed, such as social distancing and wearing masks and using hand sanitizers and so on. So that is the takeaway message for me, is that even though lockdown was not strictly imposed in Tokyo, in Japan, they still had very low incidence of coronavirus outbreaks. And that I attribute completely to individual personal responsibility and also following very strictly masks, use of masks and sanitizing and so on.
Dr. Vijay, I think the key phrase that you used here is something that we, at least in you know, this part of the world, in the United States, I think as a nation have been struggling with, which is this sense of personal, individual responsibility when it comes to an individual's actions to stop the spread or to contain, you know, exposing others to the potential symptoms of COVID. You know, once again, part of your role as a 747 pilot is to travel to parts of the world, so you do experience cultures all over, though your home base is New York City. You know, do you feel that there is a capacity for the United States to reach the level that you witnessed in a country like Japan, which is well known for the social discipline that they exhibit, even outside of this crisis? They are very well known for the orderly and the disciplined society that they have in Japan versus United States, where individual liberty and freedom and your right to do certain things often takes precedence, sometimes over things like the greater good, right? Do you feel that, you know, folks in the United States on a cultural level have the capacity to take social or individual responsibility in the coming months or years as we figure out how to reopen and interact with one another in response to this virus?
I think I lost video on.
You're still on. We still have your connection.
All right. Yes, I think it's my sincere appeal to fellow Americans to follow strictly precautionary measures that have been issued by CDC, such as taking personal responsibility, individual responsibility, and collective responsibility in a family and in the community to wear masks, definitely maintain strict social isolation, and use hand sanitizers and so on. National Academy of Science and Institutes for Diabetes and Kidney Disorders have revised some of their recommendations. And now it is said that in a closed room or in a closed environment, such as in an airplane or in a bus, it is not necessary, it is not enough to maintain 6 feet. Now the recommendation is to maintain 10 to 12 feet. And part of it comes from studies where they've shown that when a person coughs, about 3,000 droplets are released into the air surrounding the person. And if you sneeze, it's 40,000 droplets around the person. And if it's a closed ventilation system, or if the windows and doors are not open and there is no cross ventilation, this tends to stick around the person for about 10 or 12 minutes.
My goodness.
That definitely is a risk for other people in the room. So my sincere advice would be to follow all precautions, even when you're indoors, especially if one family member suffers from sneezing or coughing. And in Japan, the interesting thing was that the only sign that I noticed was in public transportation in the trains that said, please avoid unnecessary talking and to wear a mask when you talk. So that would be my advice. And I think our fellow Americans are intelligent enough and sophisticated enough to be able to understand and to follow these precautions. And I'm positive we will be able to duplicate the same results we have in Japan.
We certainly hope so. Doctor, we're going to take another quick break right here. Stick around. आप भी ऐसे ही जुड़े रहें. हम ब्रेक के बाद कन्वर्सेशन जारी रखेंगे. वेलकम बैक फ्रॉम द ब्रेक. आप देख रहे हैं स्ट्रेट टॉक एंड बात हो रही है डॉक्टर विजय के साथ, जो ना के सिर्फ एक हार्ट सर्जन है न्यूयॉर्क सिटी में, बट 747 जंबो जेट के पायलट भी हैं. येस, ही इज़ डूइंग दीज थिंग्स एट द सेम टाइम professionally. So we talked a little bit about his background. Let's hear what's in store next. Dr. Vijay, welcome back to the program. Dr. Vijay, once again, you know, you are a cardiothoracic surgeon working in Mount Sinai in New York City. You're also simultaneously a jumbo jet pilot working commercially, and before COVID you had a schedule that allowed you to do both of these things in conjunction with each other, which once again is a feat in and of itself. But today, during COVID, your work is letting you facilitate the transportation of essential PPE equipment from around the world and bring it here in the United States. You've been piloting these insane 22-hour flights, 10 hours to go to China or Asia and 10 hours to come back to Anchorage, where you're based out of, to bring this equipment to us. You know, first of all, we thank you for your service. Dr. Vijay, you have some exciting things on the table. Clearly, you're someone who does not sit back idly ever. So even during all of this, there's some, you know, things you're working on. There was, you know, some talk of a TED Talk on the horizon. Please share with our viewers what's next. What can we expect from you?
Thank you. Yes, I actually did the TED Talk yesterday, and the TED Talk was appropriately titled Resilience, and it was a wonderful talk and I enjoyed it. And the resilience that we discussed is in these crisis moments, how I could straddle two different professions and what it is that allows a person to be resilient enough to merge two different talents and skills and produce an effort towards crisis intervention. So most of my talk centered on the difference between talent and skill. Talent is a natural element. It's a dormant or a latent phase in life. And in order for talent to be converted into skill, there should be training and exposure and experience. So skill is nothing but talent given an opportunity. And I personally divide resilience into reactive resilience and proactive resilience. And reactive resilience is when an insult or an injury is given to a biological entity. And the biological entity then responds in a way that allows it to survive and to evolve. So, in that sense, coronavirus can be viewed as a biological entity that has an ability to survive an insult or an attack from changing environmental conditions. The virus itself doesn't see whether it's in Italy or in the US or in India. The virus just responds to the current and changing environmental conditions. And that is a reactive resilience. But we humans are also blessed with cerebral faculties, so we can anticipate, analyze, and forecast a crisis. And so we can prepare ourselves with training to get what we call proactive resilience. And that's the difference between talent and skill. Talent is reactive resilience, which awakens inside every person and biological entity an ability to meet an insult. Whereas proactive resilience or skill that is imparted to each human on account of training prepares you. So talent is a state of latency. Skill is a state of readiness. Several different professions have people with that state of readiness, whether it's firefighters, doctors, engineers, nurses, teachers, social workers, models, actors, dancers. They all have a certain kind of resilience, whether it's physical resilience, cognitive resilience, or emotional resilience. When you train them in a targeted manner, then they all become first responders. And that's the difference between having a talent and having a skill and translating that skill with targeted training to become first responders. And I can assure everyone here in the audience that they can all become first responders if they are primed, prepared, and ready to convert their talent into skill, any skill. So my suggestion is use this COVID time when you're homebound to convert all your talents, natural talents, into some sort of skill, so you're ready to become a first responder when you're needed. Rise to the occasion before the occasion arises, and that's my sincere advice.
Absolutely. Dr. Vijay, with such empowering words to close out today's interview. Once again, we thank you so much for your service, not just as a first responder from the medical profession, but as someone who is hands-on involved in the fight with the aviation side of your work to transport such essential PPE from around the world and bring it for our healthcare workers here in the United States. We thank you for your service. We wish you the best of luck. Stay safe, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon, and we'll keep an eye out for that TED Talk to make sure we can watch it as soon as it's available. Thank you for joining us today, and you take care. The rest of our viewers, thank you for watching. This was a special episode of Straight Talk, and I want to let everyone know कि आप हमेशा अपना feedback, अपने comments, questions हमारे साथ share कर सकते हैं. Ashmita at justbroadcasting.com, info@justbroadcasting.com. We'll see you again tomorrow evening. Have a good night. Namaskar.